Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, friends, enemies, and comrades, welcome. This is Kenya Revolutionary for another quick session. It's a nice, bright, sunny day, but it's not that sunny, it's not that warm, it's kind of freezing. But I have to drop just this video real quick. I just wanted to talk about something real quick. And as you can see, the topic is why a people's popular revolution cannot work in Kenya. I know I've been advocating for it. I supported it, and we saw a glimpse of what could happen during the 2024 September. It was July 25th last year when the Gen Zs were on the streets and almost took over State House and shut down the parliament, Occupy Parliament. Remember that? Okay. But I will tell you why this will never work, okay? I know some of you are like, huh? You're always you're a proponent of this, Gen Z is taking over and taking out Ruto through a popular revolution. But here's why I'll tell you it cannot work. If you look at Africa, let's just say Africa in general, especially on the West Africa, you see that majority of the regime change always come through a coup d'etat. Okay, military coup d'etat or some kind of an armed struggle. Okay, it's never the people rising up and taking out the regime at hand. You saw with Ouattara in Ivory Coast, the people went out there trying to take him out, but he survived because he had the army or whatever the case is. We saw with is it Baya, whatever the case is, the Cameroonian octogenarian who has been ruling for 40 years and is still in power. You know, people rose up after he stole the elections, but they were not successful. Museveni in Uganda, you know, they are facing elections very soon. But again, you'll see probably they will not be able to take him out. Why is this? Why is this? A very interesting segment that I saw from a Kenyan lawyer. Not a segment, but it was a TikTok video talking about the ills of democracy, where democracy failed, why Socrates and Plato hated democracy. The main argument against democracy was that, you know, when people are voting, there's always a huge number of uninformed voters, okay? You go there believing that voting for candidate X is going to change your condition, but not knowing that you don't have enough information regarding candidate X political position, candidate X history, okay, in governance. So you end up voting for somebody just because they are famous. Yes, I agree on Mugendi. Nice seeing you, brother. Yes, it can happen, but it's next to impossible. Now, again, before I get to this, ladies and gentlemen, again, my name is Kenya Revolutionary. If you haven't subscribe, share. We talk about Kenyan politics on this channel and world politics as it relates to Kenya, okay? And we also talk about Eastern African politics because our neighbors are going through some stuff, like Tanzania and Uganda are also facing election pretty soon. So we'll also cover that. But anyway, the reason why I mentioned that most African countries always only succeed in regime change through a coup d'etat, armed struggle, or military coup d'etat, not the people actually standing up and taking out these regimes. Yes, we have few success stories, but in the long run, were they really successful? For example, Madagascar, when that previous president that just got overthrown, when he got there, what happened? The NGOs that we know of, the Western NGOs that are very active in African countries, funnel money to give this youth to have an uprising, okay? Listen, majority of the young people, when they get paid because of the disparity between the poor and the rich. They're desperate to have something to hold on to. So a few dollars in their pockets, like John Nani, like Boniface Mwangi and Martha Karua, and what's her name? That Somali lady. I forgot her name. You know, they will go to the streets and mobilize, hand in some money, and mobilize people to go to the streets, so that we can have a demonstration. But the problem is that these paid activists, they seem to be controlled opposition. Control in the sense that even if they succeed in taking out the regime of the day, these same NGOs, they always prop up a leader that will think it's has been organically been picked up or chosen by the people. But the truth is, these so-called leaders, like the previous one that just got removed from Madagascar, okay? He was basically a French citizen. He was put there by Macron. But by the time he was being elected, majority of the people thought that this guy is the chosen one. He's been organically handpicked by the people to be the next prime minister of Madagascar. Okay? Same thing is happening in Nepal right now. Nepal had a successful people's revolution. But I just talked to a couple that they have a business here, a laundry business that I usually talk to them sometime whenever I go there. And they just told me the situation in Nepal. They say Nepal revolution, people's revolution, was actually spearheaded, financed by Western powers. Okay? Now, from an outsider looking in, you might be happy and proud of the young people who are standing up against the government of the day, the oppressive government of the day. And you can say, oh, wow, the people are standing up, they're taking power in their own hands. And usually, the grievances, the reason behind these people going out there to protest against the government of the day are legit reasons, okay? They come up with legit, just like the Gen Zs. I, for one, Gen Zs in Kenya, I strongly believe majority of the Gen Zs in Kenya, okay, while they went out there believing that it was time to make a change and remove this political class, this corrupt Kenyan political class, the people that were behind the Gen Z movement in Kenya were Western powers and this very political class, corrupt political class. What happened, in my estimation, in my view, with the benefit of hindsight, I think the ODM faction, the opposition, like I've always said, if you remember closely, by the time June 25th, 2024 happened, okay, Ruto had already struck a deal with Raila Odinga. They were discussing the NADCO arrangement, which we call the broad-based arrangement, okay? Okay, they were negotiating who will take what, and what, right? Remember that? But it was not finalized. They seem to have reached a stalemate. The talks were stalling, but they were still on. And part of the conditions that the Ruto government asked the ODM folks was that, hey, listen, if we are going to sit down and have these discussions, you guys have to stop going to the maandamano, the protest. You have to stop with the protest. We cannot have these discussions while you guys are on the streets protesting. That was the part of the conditions. The main condition that the government, Ruto side, UDA-led government, told the ODM folks, if you guys want to come to the table so we can have a peace talk or broad-based, in your handshake, you guys have to first stop the Maandamano. So they did stop the Maandamano. They kept their promise. But they did something in a slick way. They went back in Maandamano in a slick way. Since the talk started stalling, I believe ODM, through their associates, the Jimmy Wanjigis and others, finance, and with the help of the NGOs, they financed this Gen Z movement that eventually got to the streets. Okay? So that it was to blindside Ruto to think that this is not an ODM-led Maandamano, but this is Gen Z Maandamano. Okay? To prove my point, once the Gen Z went and took over parliament, occupied parliament, we know what transpired. Who are the first people to step in? You know, that was a move to force Ruto's hand into this broad-based government. That June 25th, Ninio. That's why I highlighted Ninio. I highlighted a clip when Jimmy Wanjigi was in Ngugi's Maina Ngugi, I think that's her name, podcast, when he said, he basically admitted that he was one of the people who are financing this Gen Z movement. Okay? And we know the Boniface Mwangi and others, what kind of NGOs they work for, the George Soros organization that they work for. Okay? So basically what I'm saying is this. As much as we like to think that the Gen Z movement was organic, it was not that much organic. It was organic in the sense that there was a lot of young folks who came out there who believed and felt strongly about the grievances. They had real grievances against this government. But the people who are actually controlling the Maandamano, the protest, were the very people who are in bed with the political class. You understand? So they could steer this protest whichever way they wanted it to go. They controlled how far this protest, this Gen Z protest, could go in whatever direction it went. That's why they never were successful in occupying State House as it was planned. Okay? Now, with that one said, again, to prove my point, once Raila Odinga and the ODM signed that memorandum of understanding with UDA to work together, and they claimed that the reason why the Gen Z stopped Maandamano is because they came in and stepped to save the day, which shows me that this Gen Z movement was not organic. It was actually under the control of ODM-affiliated politicians. Not only ODM, but the so-called opposition. People, the political class, the elites who are haggling over who should take what position and what ministerial docket or cabinet secretary position. Okay? But they use the Gen Zs to do their dirty work by going to the protest and label it a Gen Z protest. They could not label it an ODM protest because that will violate the conditions that Ruto agreed upon with them. So instead of calling it an ODM-led protest, it was called a Gen Z protest. You understand? That's why, again, to prove my point, look at the protest subsequent to the sit-down between Ruto and Raila. It was Raila's people, ODM, who are working now together with the police to shut down any kind of protest against the government. Once they walishapewa viti, now they could easily shut down this protest, which indicates to me that this was a largely controlled popular protest that we labeled Gen Z. Look at the individuals that were so-called said to be the leaders of this Gen Z, the Caswells. They went and aligned themselves with either Gachagua, ODM, and other folks, other part of the political class. Okay? Omuganda is telling me Bobi Wine booted out the Raila of Uganda's politics. Yeah, okay. I see that. All right. Thank you for liking. Like the video. I saw Bobby Wine was on the presidential debate in Uganda. So I don't know. I missed I had Yoweri skip that one. But anyway, so the point I'm making here is this. It is hard to have a popular revolution in Kenya simply because of this. It is easy to compromise these young folks who are looking to make a name for themselves. The easiest, quickest way to become an overnight celebrity and become an overnight billionaire or a millionaire is to become a politician or a political activist in Kenya. So these folks, that's why you see the Bunge la Wananchi. Thank you, Sana. Thank you, Sana. Good morning, good evening, good night, Bobby. Brian Mabry. So what I'm trying to say is this. Since everyone is thirsty for fame and quick money, it is easy to get these people compromised. You know, I was watching a clip of Bior, the guy who was running in Kasipul and got, 500 votes. And he was responding to people trolling him for getting only 500 votes. This guy was posting himself in a swimming pool and a huge house saying, "Oh, look at my house, look at my G-Wagon, look at how big my house is." So it shows you psychologically these guys think that having material things, having a big house, being famous, that's what really matters in this. Unasikia? That's why I'm saying it will be hard for us to have a people's popular revolution, because tukianza kuprotest, tukianza kumaandamana, Ruto will do something that he has already done. Identify who seems to be the leader of this, who the influential figures within this popular movement, and compromise them and have them direct this movement away from this idea of removing the regime of the day. You understand? That's how easy it is. And that's how Ruto actually did it. That's why unaona akina Kasmuel, they were promised position kuja kuwa youth leader of ODM and sijui nini. You know? Yes. The control opposition was booted out of Uganda. They turned and started working with Museveni. Absolutely. Same thing with what is happening in Uganda apparently. Yeah? Like Mugendi is telling. So you can see, it is easy. Now, let me mention something here. I know we compare democracies as far as we take a page of the U.S. Revolution in U.S. or the independence, how United States of America got its independence and how they came up with their constitution. And we always compare that with Kenya. Okay, we try to mimic, or not mimic, but try to apply what they did with the Kenyan context. And there's a huge difference. You can't compare the two. If you look at the history of America, how the US became a republic, you have to remember that the people who are having this great constitutional conference in Philadelphia, these were people who came from England, and they were landowners, and they were well educated. They had a lot of money. Some of them were even slave owners. What I'm trying to say is this: they were well educated. They were the elite of the land. And they decided to, come up with this constitution saying that, you know, we hold this truth and whatever, blah, 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 saying that every man is equal, but they were actually referring to themselves as wealthy landowners, part of the elite of the land. Because remember, these guys came from England and took land, pushed away the indigenous people, Indians, and they were rich. These were not poor people. These were educated people. Now, if you look at Kenya, you see that the disparity between the elites and the poor is so huge. You have a population that majority of them are not well educated. They do not have, economically, they are stifled. You know, they can barely think for themselves. I'm not saying that they do not have working mental faculties are not all the way there. I'm just saying that it is easy for them to be bought off. That's why you had a lot of cases of voter bribing, where these politicians, they show up in the polling station and they bribe the voters to vote for a certain candidate. Why are they willing to take that bribe and vote for a certain candidate? It is because, number one, economically they are stifled. They're suffering. I want a pesa. They're struggling. They're living in squalid living condition. Number two, they're not well educated. So it is hard for them to make an educated choice. It is hard for them to see past the shenanigans of William Samoei Ruto and Gachagua and all these clowns that are pretending to want to bring change in Kenya. So, in that case, you are not going to succeed to take out these corrupt political elites at the top. So the only way you can do it is through two ways. And they are very bloody and unfortunate. It can be bloodless, like the case of Cuba under Batista. Castro had to go to the bushes and came out and told Batista, it's over, get out. Or the other way is to have the most common way you see on West Africa, military coup d'etat. But again, then the risk is, if you're going to use the gun to have a regime change, it is not guaranteed that the person who will take power will do the right thing, like Ibrahim Traore. You might either end up with an Ibrahim Traore, if that person is a nationalist or is a patriot, or you can have somebody like Museveni, who will stay there for the next 40 years, ruling, having a military rule, cracking down on any signs of opposition or critique of his regime. So yeah, folks, this is what I wanted to communicate today. If you see even the internet, people who 3 months ago, 5 years, 6 months ago, were speaking of change, now they're talking about ODM, UDA, and all this. All these parties will not bring you any meaningful change. I've been saying that. I was among the first who told you that elections shall be rigged. You saw what happened in Mbeere North. Now everyone is waking up. They're saying, oh, it is obvious that Ruto is planning to rig, or this IEBC cannot be trusted. I told you from the get-go. There's nothing trustworthy about this IEBC. Ruto handpicked these folks. What did you expect? Why are you acting surprised? I told you, Ruto will do this. Sasa mmeona after this by elections, now all of a sudden you can see it is becoming clear to you that this is the plan that Ruto will do. And you can see, I used to tell you guys, mlikuwa mnaniambia ati mnaenda kulinda kura. How are you going to linda kura and Murkomen ameshasema ati atakuwa na polisi hapo, ukishapiga kura urudi nyumbani, usikae hapo, to stop lingering around. You see what I'm saying? So I'm telling you, the only way to me, as I see it as of now, is let's hope for a military man deciding that, hey, Ruto, you need to step down, okay? Or, this is hard though, but I will not say it here because I don't want people to think the deal. But anyway, so that's why today I've realized, after looking at how the politics is being conducted in Kenya, we are so easily distracted by nonsensical political drama. Ati ODM imeisha, sijui DCP is gaining sijui momentum, sijui this is this and that. Things that do not help the common mwananchi. Listen, I was listening to this lawyer, Willis Otieno, being asked about how the party, Safina Party, can change Kenya. And he kept on going about the Kenyan debt. Oh, we are going to not pay the debt. And I wish I could just scream through my screen and so that he can hear me. Okay? Yes, thank you very much, Omgendi. The problem with the African majority of the dictatorial rule in Africa starts from the top. There's nothing democratic about how we govern ourselves. Let's face it. If you look at even the kingdoms in Africa, there was some semblance of democracy where the Baraza Wazee will discuss an issue and adjudicate on it. Okay? But the king, whoever that was, the leader of the community, what he said, ndio ilikuwa inafanywa hivyo. Okay? So that's why the mistake we make, or the reason why we have a hard time grappling or grasping this concept, this democratic concept, is because we've never actually experienced it. We read about it. Like I told you, democracy in the US worked because of the fact that the people who wrote this constitution were people who were well educated. They had means of production, and they lived by the rule or the constitution that they actually came up with. Of course, with time, it was, messed up, and now we have all sorts of unconstitutional things happening. But we fail to understand the main problem in Kenya. You cannot, like this head of Safina Party and Willis Otieno and others, claim that you are going to you're going to refuse to pay the debt that Kenya owes, or you're going to improve the economy, or you're going to introduce the idea of voting for sheriffs for different counties. All these ideas mean nothing if you cannot change where power stems from. The ultimate power personified in this position of the executive presidential position in Kenya, the person who sits there is the person who calls the shots. The person who sits as the head of the state in Kenya is the person who calls the shots. He will determine who is the MCA, who is the MP, and who is the army comprised of. Because that's the kind of system we've been living under. The Constitution contradicts that, That's why I'm saying, in order to bring systematic change in Kenya, you have to have a strong man who takes out Ruto and has power as the head of state in Kenya, then implements this constitution as it was originally intended. Then you can talk about the economic aspect of Kenya regarding the debt, regarding the corruption, regarding the SHA shift and all that stuff, infrastructure, and all of that. So, coming up with this manifesto and telling us about how you're going to undo the debt and how you are going to, you sound like Ruto in 2022, Mr. Safina Party, Willis Otieno, and whatever your party leader is, I forgot his name, Jimmy Wanjigi. You sound like Gachagua with his DCP nonsense, one term, and DAP, and Martha Karua's party and Wiper. You sound all the same. The biggest thing you have to address is how you can actually get power. And after you get power, you take it to the people. You hand it over to the people. And you can only hand it over to the people by implementing the constitution that is already in existence. As of right now, Ruto's regime, Uhuru's regime, Kibaki's regime, Moi's regime, Kenyatta One regime, none of them respected the rule of law. They ruled supreme, and their word was law. That's why I keep on saying we are living under a criminal enterprise in Kenya. There's nothing constitutional about it. Ruto is doing whatever he wants. Ni mchezo. Gachagua anacheza hapa. That's why you have people who are selling drugs na kwa government na wanafanya all kind of manner of things with no repercussions. It reminds me of Batista before, Batista in Cuba before Fidel Castro took over. Cuba was a safe haven for the mobs, for the crime families in America. People went to party over there. But the indigenous people of Cuba were suffering. They were not feeling the economic changes, improvement, because the government was gaining from the casinos that they were opening, the nightclubs, the pombe they were selling to the American gangsters that were going to Cuba to celebrate during Batista's Nino. But the people were suffering, were living in squalid living conditions. Same thing with Kenya. You hear tourists go there and they say, oh, Kenya is a great company. It's a great country. We're enjoying the Kenya. Kenya is wonderful. It's more Americanized. It's the most westernized country in Africa. But if you ask the indigenous people, are you able to have 3 meals in a day? They can barely make it. Do you have a job? They have PhDs and masters and they can't find a job. So the indigenous people are not feeling the economic benefits of the country. It's the few elites. And the constitution contravenes that, addresses this issue. So the problem is at the top, the people who hold power. So before you start focusing on all these talks about economy and your manifestos and all this stuff, you have to address how to rid yourselves of the criminal elite in Kenya who are ruling unopposed, who are ruling without any care. That's what I'm talking about. And like I said, it will be difficult, if not impossible, to have a people's popular revolution, because the very young people that we are depending on to have this or participate in this revolution are easily compromised because We have been programmed through this culture, pop culture of celebrities, talking about, wewe uko broke, have money so you cannot date before you have money, pata chapa, materialism, ism and schism. Unaelewa? We have been programmed to think that having money is what makes you a valuable human being. If you're not rich, you're not valuable. That is the culture, the Western culture that has been inculcated into our young folks' minds. That's why they're growing up bragging about owning G-Wagons, owning Mercedes-Benz, owning Aston Martins, owning BMW, owning a Porsche, owning a Bentley, owning a Lamborghini, Ferrari. I have a big house with a swimming pool. That is what we value. Instead of thinking of how we can actually improve our nation by together sacrificing to fight for a constitution that works for everyone, that gives opportunity to every tribe, every community in Kenya. But we have to first take out these criminal political class in Kenya who are playing this merry-go-round Russian roulette. They are pretending to be united opposition one day, the next day they are in the government. Mchezo wa town. And they're so good at it, they've compromised the so-called influential youths that were being looked at as the face of the struggle. The Caswells, the Moraras, the Boniface Mwangis. These people have become the mouthpiece of the so-called very government that is oppressing the people. That's why I'm saying the most likely viable way of taking out this criminal class is the Fidel Castro way, the Che Guevara way. It's either go to the bushes or we hope for Ibrahim Traore to step in and tell Ruto and Gachagua and Karua and Musalia Mudavadi and Musyoka to step down and implement what the Constitution says. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, friends, and comrades, my name is Kenya Revolutionary. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace and blessings. Thank you very much, Omuganda, Omugeri, and Mabri. I'll see you guys next for the next video. Like, subscribe, share, comment. If you're going to watch this on repeat, please do the same. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace and blessings. I'm out.